Hello and welcome to Volume 4 of Irishman Talks About Japanese PS1 Games. The Japanese PS1 library continues to be an almost endless treasure trove of weird and wonderful games, and also sports titles and waifu mahjong. Lots and lots of waifu mahjong. So as always, in today's episode we're going to take a look at 3 Japan-only PlayStation games. We're going to take our giant list of games, randomize the list, take the top 100 and then add them all into a big spinning prize wheel. We're then going to spin the wheel 3 times, and whatever 3 games the wheel lands on, they're going to get their time to shine on the grandest stage of them all, a very small YouTube channel. So let's not waste any more time. I want to play some games, you want to see some games, and as long as we place our trust in the wheel, it will provide.
The wheel will provide.
First up, we have Mighty Hits, released on the PlayStation in 1996 and developed by the team over at Altron Corporation. Do you remember Point Blank? I love Point Blank. It's up there with the House of the Dead as my favourite light gun series. It's such a fun concept, a variety of short shooting gallery style minigames played back to back, each full of personality and fun gimmicks. Well, Mighty Hits is Point Blank. A weird Wild West themed low budget clone of Point Blank, but still, it's Point Blank. So yeah, anybody familiar with Namco's series of arcade light gun games will no doubt see its influence here. We got ourselves a light gun game built around short minigames that test your aim and shooting skills. One key difference between the two is that Point Blank is a series that began in the arcades, while Mighty Hits is a game made exclusively for consoles. So let's see if that console exclusivity allows for a few interesting additions to the formula. Of course, being a light gun game, the ideal and expected way to play this game is using a light gun. And in this case, Mighty Hits supports Konami's Justifier light gun. No Namco GunCon support here, I'm afraid. Now, like many, I don't have a CRT light gun combo lying around my apartment, so playing this game the way the light gun gods intended, well, that's not an option, I'm afraid. Now, we could play the game using the D-pad, but lucky for us, we got ourselves a game with PlayStation mouse support. And while it's no replacement for a good light gun, the mouse is a much nicer option for these type of games, even if it makes a few specific challenges a little bit trivial. Starting up Mighty Hits, you're greeted to some prime mid-90s PS1 CGI. The whole thing is nonsensical, it's weird, and it's oddly nostalgic for some reason. It made me want to go back and watch some Tekken 1 endings. Ah, good times. So the opening introduces you to the Mighty Hits world. It's kind of like a Wild West theme where a kid is playing with toys. You got dolls, toy horses, and everybody looks fun and cartoony. Does this matter to the game? No, not at all. This is pretty much just a loose setup for the minigames, but for what it is, I think it's pretty fun. Once we get into the actual game itself, well, we quickly find out that the game being a console exclusive means very little because Mighty Hits is still an arcade style game true and true. Options are limited with a single player mode and 2-player co-op and competitive options. Once you're in the game, you get the option of choosing between 3 different difficulties: easy with 6 stages, normal with 9 stages, and hard with 15 stages. Once you've chosen your difficulty, you get brought to the level select screen where you get given 3 levels randomly from a selection of 30. You've then got to play the 3 stages in a row and do your best not to mess up and lose one of your very valuable lives. The minigames can range from simple tasks like shooting as many targets as possible in a time limit to reach a target quota. You might have to shoot as many bullets as you can into a single target as fast as possible. You might have a limited set of bullets and you need to be more careful with your aiming to complete certain tasks. Or the games might just be something completely wacky, like freeing a penguin from his ice prison, guiding a guy in balloons down to a tiny platform in the middle of the ocean by shooting away his balloons, or maybe even memorizing a song and shooting bells to play it back. It's really easy to pick up and play, and look, with a concept like this, it's hard not to have a good time. Even though the instructions for each game are only in Japanese, it's almost always immediately obvious what you need to do as soon as you start the game, so there's no need to worry about the language barrier here, thankfully. In between levels, you might also get a chance to play a bonus game where you choose from a selection of cards that might give you extra lives, the option to choose one of the upcoming minigames, or maybe even just nothing, if you're really unlucky. Of course, if you fail any of the minigames, you lose one of your lives, and if you run out of lives, it's game over, with no option to continue. Now this won't really matter much on the easy difficulty, but once you move up to normal and hard, not only are you playing more games in a row, but the difficulty of the games ramps up significantly too, with faster targets, less ammo and higher quotas to hit. So lives become a pretty valuable resource in the higher difficulties, where the margin for error is much higher. I actually liked how challenging the game felt on the hard difficulty. It turned the game into a very challenging gauntlet of minigames, and even though once again the mouse can trivialize some of the games, I still struggled a fair bit during this, and actually making it to the end of the hard course felt like a decent challenge. If you do manage to make it to the end of a course, you're rewarded with some fun cutscenes for your trouble. They're pretty short, but they're oh so dumb. It's worth the effort for each. There is unfortunately no additional minigames that you can unlock outside of the standard 30 that can appear, but if you do beat the hard difficulty, you do unlock an extreme difficulty with 18 games in a row that are now increased to bullshit levels of difficult. So there is something here for the masochist too, which is, it's nice to see. On the presentation front, well, it's an early PlayStation light gun game, and the 3D graphics certainly have aged the game's look quite a bit. It definitely lacks the big budget polish of Point Blank, but I still think it looks pretty nice at times. The 2D backgrounds look good, the models are clean and colourful, and it all runs at a nice stable 60 frames per second, so there's very little to complain about really. Although I will say I'm not a fan of this big, cheap looking game clock. There's just something really off about how it looks to me. Like, it actively makes the game look a little lower budget. Plus it can block some of the targets in the game, so yeah, the clock sucks. The music and sound is nice though. The gunshots sound like pop guns, which suit the game's kiddie aesthetic. And even though I wouldn't say the music is really memorable, it's catchy and it's pleasant and it suits the minigames well, so it gets a thumbs up from me. Look, at the end of the day, there's not a huge amount to Mighty Hits. It's a relatively bare-bones point-blank clone, but for what it is, it's actually a pretty good one. I think it lacks the polish, charm, and variety that the point-blank games have, especially when it comes to longevity and extra modes, which the point-blank series does very well. Mighty Hits' 30 minigames will likely get repetitive after an hour or two of play, but there is enough fun and challenge here for any light gun fan. Interestingly, this isn't the only game in the series either. While the original did only make its way to the PS1 in Japan, the game did see a Western release as a Saturn exclusive in PAL regions. Also, as a little side note, something that I found really weird about the PAL Saturn release of this game is that it's one of the few games ever released where the back of the box features no text, only pictures of gameplay. I just thought that was really strange and that you all needed to see that for some reason. Anyway, Mighty Hits did see a follow-up in 1999 called Mighty Hits Special, which thankfully did make its way to the PS1 in the West this time around, although once again only in PAL regions. Mighty Hits Special is a bit odd though. From what I've played, this is more or less the exact same game as the original Mighty Hits. The only difference is that this version does seem to support the gun con as well as the justifier, which is a nice bonus, but that's about it. In spite of it being more or less the exact same game as the original Mighty Hits, Special is still considered a brand new game with its own unique product code. From what I gather, Mighty Hits Special was a budget release of the original Mighty Hits, but rather than be included as a greatest hits or platinum style line of releases, the publisher was just like, put Special on the front, reduce the cost, add gun con support, and say it's a brand new game, and that's the game that made it to the West. So while the original Mighty Hits is technically a Japan only release on the PS1, thanks to Mighty Hits Special, it's also not. But it is? I don't know, it's a weird one. Regardless, I had a fun time with this game. It's no replacement for the Point Blank or Ghoul Panic games, but if you like that style of light gun shooter, I'm sure you'll find a lot to like in this one. As for everybody else, well, it's at least worth checking out for the goofy cutscenes, so go nuts.
that we will provide.
Up next we have Archer to Astaroth no Nazomakaimura Incredible Toons, released on the PlayStation in August 1996. I've always had a love-hate relationship with the Ghost and Goblins series. I've played pretty much all the mainline series entries, and I am very, very bad at them. But I've also played a bunch of the series' various spin-off games, and I'm a big fan of pretty much all of them. So it was a nice surprise to see that there is a Ghost and Goblins game that I never heard of before, and not only that, it just so happens to be a Ghost and Goblins reskin of a popular computer game series called The Incredible Machine. If you're unfamiliar with The Incredible Machine, it was a very popular title released in the early 90s that essentially had you solving puzzles using a series of Rube Goldberg machines. Basically, you had to perform simple tasks in overly complicated ways. The series saw several releases over the years with upgraded graphics and various improvements to the gameplay, but for the most part the series avoided consoles altogether, except for a lone console port of the original which made its way to the 3DO, and also this one-of-a-kind Ghost and Goblins edition released only in Japan thanks to Capcom. So from what I can tell, Capcom licensed the use of this engine directly from the original developers of the Incredible Machine series, and this particular engine was originally used for the third game in the series called Sid and Al's Incredible Toons, hence the name of Capcom's game being Incredible Toons rather than Incredible Machine. As for the Ghost and Goblins branding, supposedly Capcom were just planning on making a normal port of the game, but decided to throw this in here at the last minute just to get a little more crossover appeal with the game's Japanese audience. So, as you could imagine, seeing as this is a console version of a game designed with PCs in mind, PlayStation mouse support is back again. The gameplay here all revolves around moving objects on screen, so naturally it's the perfect game to play with a mouse. Using your D-pad works just fine too, of course, so don't worry if you haven't got a mouse lying around. This game has a plot, funnily enough, although it is the exact same plot from every Ghost and Goblins game, so don't worry about reading the text, just know you've got a princess that needs saving. There aren't many of these sections, but they do look cute and can be pretty funny at times, so they are a welcome addition whenever they do pop up. As for the meat of the game, well, it's puzzles. Lots and lots of puzzles. The game is broken up into a series of individual levels that you progress through in a linear fashion one by one. Your goal in each level is to basically complete a specific task using a set number of items that the game designates to you. The task for a level might be to guide Arthur up a series of ladders, feed this guy a fish, open a bunch of chests, hit a switch a number of times. Sometimes you even just straight up kill Arthur. Why not? The goal for each level can be pretty much anything, and it's up to you not just to figure out what the goal is, more importantly, it's how you can achieve it. Now the game does give you information on the tasks in each level, as well as information on what each item does to make things a little bit easier, but this is all in Japanese. Now at first I expected this might cause me a bit of hassle when trying to learn the game, but honestly this is just such an intuitive game, and I think anybody could pick it up and understand the basics here in no time, regardless of what language you speak. It's the kind of game where you will just naturally figure out what your goal is after some messing about, and from there it's all about just testing the different bits and pieces, making more and more progress until you eventually build a complicated monstrosity that accomplishes your goal. Put an item here, put an item there, connect this to that, make this drop on that, just put all the items down, hit play, and see if a plan comes together. It's really that simple. This is my first time playing a game from this series, but after spending a few hours with this one, I can really see the appeal. The different items and all their interactions allow for so much variety in the puzzle design, and there's just something so inherently satisfying about setting up a chain reaction and just seeing it all pay off. It appeals to the happiest parts of my brain. As for the Ghost and Goblins branding, well of course you'll see some familiar characters and items from the series, all of it appearing in this cute 2D style. The UI and the backgrounds also fit the bill nicely. It's not the most exciting presentation out there, but none of it is distracting or takes away from the puzzle gameplay, and honestly when all is said and done, I actually think it's a very successful blending of the two different games. Is there anything here that you would not see in another Incredible Machine style game? Well, on the gameplay front, not really. But there's no other Incredible Machine games with comedy skits in between levels or great remixes of Ghost and Goblins music, so there you go. One thing that may disappoint fans of the Incredible Machine series is the lack of additional modes in this game outside of the single player puzzles. There is a basic level editor that lets you mess around with a few things, but compared to some of the features you see in other releases of the game, this is pretty lacking on the content side of things. From start to finish, I think you're looking at about 2 to 3 hours of gameplay here, depending on how quickly you blast through the game's various puzzles, which for a game of this type I think is a decent length. This very much feels like a nice game that you'd sit back with and just beat in an afternoon. It's complex, but it's rarely frustrating, it controls like a dream using the mouse, and if you're a fan of the Ghost and Goblin series, well, there's a ton of fan service here just for you. As always, your enjoyment of this will come down to how you feel about puzzle games, but I think this is one that everybody should at least give a try, regardless of their feelings on Puzzlers or the Ghost and Goblin series. There is a reason this series of games was so popular in computers, and considering this is one of the very few translations of the game brought over to home consoles, I gotta say they did a pretty good job. It also came out on the Saturn too, by the way, so Sega fans, you can join in on the fun as well, don't worry. All in all, Arthur Incredible Toons is a great addition to anybody's PS1 library, and yet another title to add to the list of excellent Ghost and Goblin spin-offs. Although let's be real, did we really expect any less from Capcom? I think not.
The wheel will provide.
Vol.4's last game is Creature Shock, developed by Argonaut Games and released on the PlayStation in August 1996. Something that caught me off guard when learning about a lot of the Japanese exclusives on the PlayStation was that there is a surprising amount of Western-made games that make an appearance. And it's not just any old games either, it shocked me to learn that there is a port of the Neverhood on PS1, as well as the Beavis and Butthead adventure game Virtual Stupidity.
どいてよ邪魔しないで
早くしろよ俺らの番だぞ
そやぞフレームチェストちゃんが
うる
待ってる
さいビーバスあの子は俺のもんだから黙っとけあ
That's weird, right? Honestly, there's enough of these games that they'd probably warrant their own videos someday, but for now, today's game also happens to fall into that category. Creature Shock comes from UK developer Argonaut Games, you know, the croc people. The game was originally released on MS-DOS, the CDI and the 3DO, and if the CDI and 3DO didn't give it away, Creature Shock is an FMV game. Of course, in the early days of the CD era of games consoles, FMV games were all the rage. Developers hadn't yet mastered the art of, polygons, so full motion video and CD quality audio was the best and easiest way to show off the new hardware. And look, for its time, going from this to this was certainly quite the leap. Although the actual quality of the gameplay on display, well, let's just say the 3DO and CDI didn't last very long for a reason. Also, fun fact, Creature Shock was apparently the last official release for the 3DO in the West, so we're checking out a piece of gaming history here. Well, on another console, but still. Anyway, the old PlayStation, it was not immune to a few FMV games itself during its early days, a good chunk of which also just happened to be ports of older games from the likes of the 3DO and the CDI. So in 1996, it was announced a port of Creature Shock was coming to the PS1 and Saturn under the title Creature Shock Special Edition. Now, while Creature Shock Special Edition did release on the Saturn in the West, the planned PlayStation version just, never did. It came out in Japan no bother though, so yeah, here we are. So first things first, the game, it's pretty much entirely in English. The only Japanese you will see in this game at all is in the cutscenes, but the in-game voice dialogue, the menus, the UI, everything here is in English. So as far as accessibility goes, don't even worry about it. In Creature Shock, we play as protagonist Commander Jason Barr.
There's a haircut you could set your watch to!
We're tasked with investigating what happened to the UNS Amazon after it got attacked by a weird tentacle asteroid near Saturn. And as you can imagine, with the weird tentacle asteroid, we are in for some weird, creepy alien fun. Anyway, don't worry too much about the plot because the game certainly doesn't. So let's talk about the gameplay because this is most certainly a video game. Creature Shock is split up into two different types of sections. You've got adventure game style sections where you navigate a map screen by screen, helped along with a nice dose of cool FMV video. And you've got arcade style shooting gallery sections, which make up roughly 2% of the game and take place on a single screen, but these are fine, I guess. So yeah, the meat of this game takes place within these FMV exploration sections, and don't worry, just because the game doesn't have very many arcade shooter sections, doesn't mean that you won't be blasting a large number of creepy aliens while exploring these cramped environments. The best way to describe Creature Shock would be that it's a first-person sci-fi horror FMV adventure shooter. Yes, I know, quite the mouthful. You do a little exploring, you do a little bit of shooting, you explore some more. It sounds like a pretty good match, honestly, and you know what? At times it kinda is. But look, this game, it's got a lot of problems, and it's not just because it's an FMV game, although that is one of the game's big issues, but we'll get to that. So first things first, the game's controls. In spite of the last two games having mouse support, and this game having mouse support in other versions, in Creature Shock on the PS1, we're stuck with D-pad controls. Now look, for navigation, getting around the world with the D-pad is just fine. You point the cursor in the direction you want to go, and you press the X button to move in that direction. It's nice and simple, it works great. For shooting, on the other hand, the D-pad is just not very good at all. Now I'll be honest, if I gotta play a light gun game using a D-pad, I will make do. It's far from ideal, but I'm still probably gonna have a good time. Creature Shock, on the other hand, this game's shooting is gonna drive you crazy. Now, in these rare arcade sections, shooting is just fine because all you gotta do is shoot the enemies that pop up on screen, hit them anywhere on the body, and they'll take a hit. On the other hand, inside the exploration sections, all the enemies only take damage when they are shot in a tiny weak point. Now, these weak points thankfully aren't that hard to figure out, but they are usually very small. And unlike the arcade shooting sections where these enemies are just little models that pop up on a static screen, here the enemies are actually part of the FMV. So these enemies with their tiny weak points, not only do they move quite erratically thanks to the full motion video, but the screen also shakes and moves about a ton while this happens. This makes it almost impossible to line up any shots because while guiding your cursor along the screen towards the target, both the enemies and the screen are shaking about so much, it is a Hail Mary trying to land shots in this game. If you were playing the game with a mouse or a light gun, I don't think it would be too bad. But with the D-pad, oh my god, I hate it so much. Thankfully, ammo was never a problem as your gun recharges if you ever get too low. But believe me, you'll want to end these fights as quickly as possible if you hope to progress through the game. And it is laughable how long it took me to hit a shot on some of these enemies as they happily just wasted my health away the whole time. And of course, if you lose your health, you're straight back to the beginning of the level, so one bad fight can easily lose you a lot of progress. As for the levels themselves, well, there's two of them. You got this fleshy organic area, which is unpleasant. And you've got another level that takes place inside some sort of industrial alien facility. Now look, yes, there's only two areas, but each of these levels are pretty big, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Some of these locations in these places look pretty damn cool. I may come across that I'm not into full motion video games, but I will be honest, I've got a bit of a soft spot for them. And on the visual front, I really like what Argonaut Games has done here. These locations are claustrophobic, they're oppressive, they're unusual, and they're genuinely pretty unnerving at times, and the way the environments wind from one area to the next, it gives a nice feeling that everything is connected. I like the designs of the aliens a lot as well. I may not like fighting them, but I was never not excited to see what was going to pop up next and out of nowhere, because there is a lot of fun and unique sections in this game. And if you die, you're even treated to some exclusive death cutscenes that are unique to different areas. So at least if you're dying, you're always going to go out in style. Unfortunately though, as much as I like the environment, these levels are essentially just a giant maze of some interesting rooms separated by tons of identical corridors. This means traversing the world is going to look like this most of the time, and believe me, it's also very, very easy to lose your sense of direction and just wander around aimlessly for a very long time. There's always a room that you are aiming to reach to progress the game forward, but actually getting there is pretty much entirely luck based on your first playthrough. There's no map, you've got a shitty compass that doesn't help you at all. You're pretty much just permanently lost in this game. There's also no puzzles and creature shock either, it is just entirely exploration and combat. Some areas do feature bonuses like health items and upgrades for your gun's capacity, but most of the time, exploring is just going to put you against more enemies, and more enemies means less health, and if you run out of health, well, you're back at the beginning of the maze, having to start all over again. So look, even though these environments are cool, you'll quickly get bored of seeing the same identical corridor over and over again sooner rather than later. And while the initial shock of seeing the aliens is always fun, the actual combat with them will probably have you pulling your hair out. The FMV also just isn't that smooth, I'm sorry to say. There's always a slight stutter moving from screen to screen that just makes things feel a little awkward, and these stutters can prove especially bothersome during fights as well. The game also seems to have some audio problems too. The game is strangely quiet, with the exploration sections only featuring sound effects, which may be by design. I think it actually helps the atmosphere quite a bit. But some of the cutscenes, they just have no sound at all, and it really seems like there should be something here. I don't know. It happens frequently enough to seem a bit odd. Really, there's practically no music in this game at all, except for the arcade bits which sound like this. Yeah, that's not really what I was expecting. Look, let's cut to the chase. I don't think this is a very good game. It's basically two giant FMV mazes with frustrating combat in between. But in spite of it all, I still felt compelled to beat the whole thing, and that I did. The last level is probably the best part of the whole game, by the way. It's not really a level per se, more of an extended cinematic boss battle. And look, even with the controls and this weird jetpack crow thing, it's a pretty cool fight, and I actually had a good time with it. Look, at the end of the day, I think if you knew the right routes to take in this game, you could probably finish the whole thing in about half an hour. And even with all my struggles, it still only took me about 90 minutes to beat it, so it is not a very long game at all. But it's got so much goddamn FMV that it still needed to come on 2 discs anyway. It even made me swap discs just to watch the ending cutscene, so thanks for that. Oh yeah, the plot. Yeah, it's nonsensical, weird shit happens all the time, there's really nothing to it, it's just kinda here, but I tried not to overthink it and just enjoy the jankiness of it all. Although shoutouts to whoever had to animate the part where the protagonist has an awful time trying to get both off and on his space shuttle. Look at this guy go. After beating the game, I was curious to see how the DOS and 3DO versions compared, and the game just looked so much smoother running on these machines. There's even music during the levels. Also, there's these new sections where you fly a ship in between the maze levels. Are these just not in the PlayStation and Saturn versions? Okay, so I went back to check and I noticed at the start screen there is a normal and special game option. The normal game has no flying sections at all. So I tried special and lo and behold, a goddamn flying section. So yeah, the flying sections from the original version were removed and the PlayStation and Saturn versions of these games got new polygonal flying sections created exclusively for the consoles. And for whatever reason, you gotta choose special game, not normal game to play these. These sections are pretty fun though. I mean, it looks really janky and it almost feels like you're playing a Net Eurosy game, but I kinda dig how trash it is. It's also got some great music and bosses, so the addition is a positive all around. Yeah, so that's Creature Shock. I feel like I might have gone on about this one for a little too long, so apologies for that. but I just thought there were so many unusual aspects about this game, from its Japan exclusivity on the PS1 to its strange visual design and even all the weird differences between the various versions. Once again, I don't think it is a very good video game, but it's still kind of fun in its own strange way, for one playthrough at least. If it's something that you actually wanted to try, well, I'd say the DOS 3DO or CDI versions are probably the way to go in this case, and that's thanks to the mouse support alone. But if you want to try the PS1 version from Japan, at least there's no language barrier that you gotta worry about, so that's nice. If you're a fan of FMV games, go ahead and give this one a try. I'm sure you'll find quite a lot to like in it. And if you can't stand FMV games, well, this one certainly isn't going to change your mind. But at least you can go check out a video of all the death scenes on YouTube. It's the best part of the game anyway, so go on, you might as well enjoy yourself some grisly FMV goodness. And with that, it's time to bring a close to Volume 4. We got to check out a fun Point Blank clone, a Ghosts and Goblins reskin of a much-loved computer classic, and a very odd FMV game about a guy with a very nice haircut. As is tradition, at the end of each episode, we've got to slot each of today's games into a tier. Is the game a must play? Is it worth trying if you like the look of it? Is the game trash and not worth your time? Or did I hit a brick wall and found the game unplayable due to the language barrier? If you've watched Volume 4 of obscure and forgotten PS1 games, you'll know that we've now added an additional tier in between try and trash called the Meh tier. A place for games that I didn't particularly enjoy, but I don't believe they're completely trash either. So for Volume 4 of Japan-only PS1 games, we see Mighty Hits and Arthur Incredible Toons make their way into the Try tier, with Creature Shock making its way into the Meh tier. Mighty Hits is a good light gun game, no doubt about it. The minigames are fun and the added mouse support is a nice bonus. But the quality of the presentation and limited content does definitely make it feel like a B tier Point Blank. Now if you're a fan of Namco shooters, you will no doubt have a good time here, but don't expect it to replace the king at the top of the mountain anytime soon. Arthur Incredible Toons is a great way to try the Incredible Machine series over on the PlayStation. Plus it's full of Ghosts and Goblins fan service and great remixes of the series' iconic music. It is a little disappointing that this version lacks some of the additional features and content seen in the likes of the PC and 3DO games, but puzzle fans and people who own the PlayStation mouse will no doubt find a lot to like with this one. And now Creature Shock, a bad game but an oddly entertaining one all the same. It's frustrating, it's janky, but it's weird, atmospheric and strangely endearing. This is one I can only recommend to fans of FMV games because these are the only people who will put up with the more frustrating aspects of this game. But for those who are willing to take the leap, there is enough wacky stuff here to make it worth at least one playthrough in my opinion. So let me know, have you tried any of these games yourself? Are there any Japanese exclusive games you'd like to see show up in the series? Drop me a comment below and let me know, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, big shout out to everybody who got in touch with more information about Blade Arts from the last episode. It was cool learning more about the game. At the moment, I'm watching a creator called Big Bang Blitz stream through the game bit by bit. He has thankfully made it much further than I did, and as expected the game gets pretty wacky, so if you want to see more of Blade Arts, this is the place to do it. For now though, I'd like to say a big thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe is always very much appreciated, and of course there's always plenty more PS1 content over on the channel if you're so inclined. I'll be back shortly with some more weird and wonderful PlayStation games, but until then, look after yourselves, take it easy, and don't forget to praise the wheel.